Hello tripodders and welcome to another video. My name's Steve and today we're looking at the histogram, or as many new photographers like to call it, that scary looking graph that you know is important but there's no way you've got time to learn all that. But don't despair, because it's really not as difficult as it looks, and once you understand what it's trying to show you, your photography will get far easier, more consistent and ultimately much better. You're coming up with me on location soon to look at the histogram in action, but before we do that I just want to spend a few moments going over what the histogram is and where you can find it on your camera. But why should you even bother with a histogram, I hear you ask? If you can clearly see that the image is properly exposed by simply looking at it on the back of the screen, what's the point in learning the histogram? Well, that's an excellent question and it's definitely worth unpacking it for a moment. You see, the camera screen lies just a little bit, and I know it's not pleasant to think of your lovely shiny new camera not being completely honest with you, but it's time you found out the truth, that our cameras sometimes lie to us, and the screen on your back of your camera is an example of this. It's a backlit screen and usually quite bright, although you can sometimes change the brightness in the settings. Couple this with the ambient lighting conditions which you're taking your picture in. This can make the screen appear brighter in dark conditions or darker in light conditions, and this basically means that you really can't rely on this image on the back of the screen to be a true representation of how your picture's been exposed. It might give you a bit of an idea, but please bear in mind that the purpose of the screen is to check things like your composition, the sharpness of your picture, any unintentional camera shake or any lens flare that might have crept into your picture. The screen was never really intended to check exposure. That's what the histogram was developed for, and that's why on most cameras you can set up the histogram to show on your images during at least the playback mode, and that's why you as a new photographer needs to understand what the histogram is showing you. Right, so now that we know that the histogram is important, the next step is to locate it. Now, all cameras will vary quite significantly, so I'm not going to go through each and every model of camera, but bear in mind that older models of cameras usually won't have a live histogram. Instead, there's a static histogram usually found within the playback menu that you can show next to your pictures. However, most modern cameras will likely have a static histogram and an active histogram, and the active histogram is great because it can show you your exposure in real time as you're setting up your shot. So what is a histogram actually showing us? Well, at first sight it can look rather daunting, can't it? But let's just break that down. So a histogram is essentially a graph within a box. It helps to imagine a histogram as something looking at your images in black and white and then all the different shades of grey within that, and then analysing these shades to give you an idea of how dark or bright your picture is. So within the square you've got the bottom line of the graph, and this is the picture's tones, and you've got the side parallel lines, and this is how much, this is the levels and the amount of tone that's within your image. Okay, so we'll break this down a little bit further. Let's start looking at the base or the tonal line of the histogram. If we start on the far left, this area will be pure black, and as you move through towards the right hand side, you move to the various sections called the mid-tones, which we'll come to in just a moment, and things get lighter as you move towards the far right. We can arrive at pure white. Okay, moving on to the parallel sides now. This is the amount of that tone. So if you've got a lot of tone in the middle and that's high up, that means there's a lot of that tone in the image, and if it drops down, there's very little of that tone within the image. Okay, I'm a big believer in practical learning, and I know this is complicated and lots to take in. So let's head out to a shoot and I'll show you how to use the histogram when exposing your image on location. So I'm here in the beautiful Lake District and I found a nice woodland and I've got a shot here, and I just want to use this shot to show you what the histogram actually does so you can get a better understanding of how it works in your photography. So I'm going to flip over now and you can look at my histogram and I'll show you what happens when we make the image lighter or darker and how you can use the histogram in your own pictures. Okay, so this is the histogram that I want to share with you here, and you can see that the bottom of the histogram here, this is your tonal curve. So from the left hand side we're looking at pure black, and the right hand side we're looking at pure white, and then we've got your levels here, so the percentage of the image that falls within that range. So we've got the nice middle area here. This is what would I consider a nicely balanced exposure. So there's a little bit in the dark, a little bit in the light, most of it's in the middle. Now if I change my exposure, okay, so I'm going to change my seconds or my shutter, I'm going to make it darker, you can see that the histogram moves over to the left. Okay, and as we go into the left, it's becoming a lot darker. Now, you might choose in some circumstances to do that. It might be a creative decision that you want a darker image to bring out the light, so that might be something you would choose to do. And there's also something called exposing to the left and exposing to the right, which we talk about in photography, but I'll come to that in another video because that's a more advanced way of using the histogram. We'll bring it back again.
And then we can go the other way. We can make the image light and overexposed. And we're now all the way over, very exposed image. Let's come back to the center. And we can do exactly the same with the aperture. So I'm going to increase the F numbers, decrease in the aperture, and you can see the image getting smaller. And again, we can go the other way. We can open it right out. This goes to f2.8, and you can see it's an slightly overexposed image there. So we can make those decisions ourselves. And that's how you can use the histogram in your photography when you're out and about to ensure your image is perfectly exposed every time.
So I hope that you can see now why understanding the histogram can be so helpful in helping us to choose our exposure and consistently getting the images exposed to how we want them. And I hope you can also see how you can use the histogram practically when you're setting up your shot. If you're unsure of anything at all, please leave a comment below. And if you want to know more about exposure and what we photographers call the exposure triangle, then you could watch this video right here.